It's going to be very cool.
Russia's indicating now it'll bring in volunteer fighters from around the world to join the war in Ukraine. Moscow claims there are thousands of applications from countries in the Middle East. The U.S. will be funneling more aid to Ukraine.
Reverend Dr. Hatch is on the line.
Okay, Reverend Hatch, how are you?
Good morning.
Here's the Tim McGuire.
Good. Wonderful hearing your voice. Just give me one moment. I'm just trying to tie up a few loose ends here.
While the emergency aid hitched a ride,
Yeah.
the bulk of the $1.5 trillion funding bill includes increased domestic spending for schools, housing, child care, renewable energy, biomedical research, and more. There's a 6% increase for defense, including more F-35 fighter jets, new Navy ships, pay raises for troops, and improvements for schools on military bases. President Biden's signature is certain.
If you're filling up your tank for the weekend, gas is up to $4.33 a gallon this morning. About 65% of Americans are fully vaccinated now against COVID. It's been 2 years since the World Health Organization declared COVID a pandemic. This is AP News. Now to COVID in China and a lockdown. The AP's Jackie Quinn.
A new surge of COVID-19 cases has prompted a lockdown in a major Chinese city. On the 2-year anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic, China's ordered a lockdown of 9 million people around the northeastern city of Changchun. A new spike in COVID-19 cases is reported there, about 100 infections. Non-essential businesses are closed, and residents are required to stay home and undergo 3 rounds of
Pastor Hatch, how are you?
Nationwide in China, 400 new cases have been detected.
This is my birthday today.
Oh my goodness, happy
Here in the US, you'll
birthday.
have to wear a mask on airplanes
Yeah.
and public transport
Bless
for
your
1 more
heart.
month through mid-April.
Thank you
The
so much for
government
beginning with
extending the
us.
requirement. This covers planes,
Absolutely.
buses, trains, and transit hubs.
Thank you so much.
I'm
God
Rita
bless
Foley,
you.
AP
God bless you.
News.
God bless you. God bless you.
This is 8:20 a.m. at
God
WCPT
bless
Willow
you.
Springs and streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com.
One moment.
We are Chicago's
Hope
progressive
you have
talk,
a wonderful
where facts matter.
birthday.
Now your WCPT 820 Chicago traffic update.
Traffic volume is but travel times are a little bit higher due to the conditions this morning. And we have a major crash on 8094 westbound at Calumet Avenue. It's been there for some time. And in fact, we're told it happened around 1 o'clock this morning. 2 right lanes are blocked at Calumet Avenue. Delays start around Kennedy Avenue. The travel time is sliding upward. It's now 34 minutes from the Toll Road and Vision Ford Freeway. Eastbound 18 with reduced speeds due to the conditions. Inbound traffic on the Eisenhower's can be a little bit tight around Des Plaines Avenue. Still just 25 minutes, 390. Stevenson, 28 minutes from the Veterans Memorial to
Have to
Shama
get
Lakeshore
these
Drive.
or Hatch. So we get up on the air.
I'd like to carry more parts at my shop, but I just don't have the room.
We
Every
bump
time I
into
go in the back
another
to get
little
wiper blades,
piece.
I trip over a dusty crate of
So
pump
there
and
we
air
go.
filters, then bang my
There
head on
is
some
that.
GTO radio.
And how is the First
eBay Motors
Lady?
never has that problem. They stock all
Doing well.
great prices.
Please give her
122
my
million of them,
warmest
with everything
regards.
from new headlights to vintage gear shifters. I can't imagine being able to stock 122
Okay,
million parts. I
everybody.
mean, where would I get all
So let me
those
say hello
shelves?
to everybody on
eBay
Facebook
Motors.
and on
That's right.
YouTube. Hey, Layla. Hey, Dave Dowling. Hey, Pearl, how you doing? Are you down there in Texas? Can't wait to speak with you today. Angela, Donnie, Dave. Hey, everybody.
And then when he was pressed, well,
Right to it.
won't you tell us at least what you're
First,
going
got
to
to
do?
talk about the
And
Jussie
said,
Smollett.
we
Talk
get
about what
powers,
happened
and
with
we'll
him
let you
yesterday,
know.
150 days for a
The
class
Tom
4
Hartman
felony.
Radio
That's something
Program.
most people
Weekdays, 11
get
a.m.
probation
to 2
for.
p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
And you know,
Are
he
you the parent of a
proclaims that
2-to-7-year-old?
he proclaimed
Listen closely
that
for
he
an
is not
exciting preview
suicidal.
radio offer. By
And I
now,
think
you've
we need to
probably
pay
heard of
attention to
ABC
that
Mouse, the
because
Parents' Choice
he doesn't
Award-winning
feel
online
safe
learning program
in the jail.
30.
Early
And
learners everywhere.
and he
ABC
shouldn't.
has like a little one-on-one teacher.
And so
it has helped
we
her
expect
so
him to
much.
return to
Right now,
us
we're offering a
in the
special
same
radio
condition
promo to
in
try
which
it
we
free for
sent
a
him to
month.
jail
But you have to
yesterday.
go
How
to
about that?
abcmouse.com/radio to claim
Look
your
at that.
copy.
15.
That's abcmouse.com/radio.
Sponsored by Age of Learning.
10.
Because facts matter. You are listening to WCPT 820.
We can change the world, change the world. change the world. We can change the world. Change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love. It's not too late. Gotta save the children. We can't wait. Let's change the world. I am green.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's a joy to be with you today on Friday, March 11th, 2022. Got to send my brother Jesse Jr. a happy birthday. God bless you. I love you, sweetie. And, of course, Pastor Marshall Hatch is going to be giving us the good news. It's his birthday also. All these Pisces in the house. My niece, Jesse's daughter. Oh, my gosh. All these people with these. My mother. Can you believe it? She, March 17th, that will be her birthday. So we have a lot to celebrate in March. God bless you, everybody, today. We're going to be talking about the Jussie Smollett verdict. He is in jail today as we speak. He proclaimed that he is not suicidal. Very interesting that he would say that, but he's very political. He does understand that he could be in danger in jail. Maybe, maybe not. Some of the brothers might have his back. That having been said, we expect him to return to us in the same condition in which he was sent to prison. And I think it's important for us to say that. So that he remains safe. And then we're going to be talking about what a pathway to peace with Ukraine. I mean, just down through the years, when you've seen Reverend Jesse Jackson go on these rescue missions, he's not gone as a politician. He's a political man, but he's first a man of the church. And he has always gone at the invitation of the home church of a particular country. You know, so that's something for us to talk about. Where does the church stand in all of this? And what about the peace activists? As we need to see the pacifists, they're getting blocked. We don't see them on television. We don't hear them on the radio. We don't really see them in the so-called corporate media. So we're going to be talking about that. And then all of this confusion about COVID, we're opening up. But do you know what to do? Doctors Shanina Knighton and Deborah Verholden are going to help you to understand that. So let's get right to it, everybody. We woke up to beautiful, snowy Chicago. I thought we were like moving into the spring. Oh, not yet. Winter's not done with us. Chicago, it's snowy outside, but it's beautiful, everybody. A high of 35 degrees today, and the snow showers will continue. Minneapolis, St. Paul, it is cold up there today. Oh, God bless you, everybody. 11 degrees above zero, partly cloudy. In the NBA tonight, the Timberwolves will be facing off against the Magic, and the Bulls have the night off. But in the NHL last night, it was active. Chicago fell to the Bruins. Bruins 4, Chicago 3. But the Wild were triumphant over the Red Wings 6-5. Major cities in Ukraine were attacked by Russian forces today as evacuations continue in several parts of the country. More than 100,000 people have been evacuated in the past 2 days as the threat of Russian bomb strikes remains an ongoing concern for Ukrainians. Russia has been using its neighbor Belarus as a springboard for many of its on-air operations, and indeed, they have been denying that a lot of the bombings are coming from them. That's very interesting, everybody. Prince William kind of stepped in at everybody as he said that the conflict in Europe is alien, and he drew a swift rebuke from people all over the world. He said it was alien for us to see war in Europe. And many people said, oh, come on, are you serious? More of the same. It's very interesting. Coronavirus today marks 2 years since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. It's been 2 years, everybody. Since then, official reports through the end of 2021 show that 6 million people worldwide have died directly because of COVID-19. Back on the home front, the choice to extend the pandemic, experts are slamming Congress's their decision to drop COVID aid, everybody. There was a $1.5 trillion omnibus bill spending package that to the dismay of many dropped COVID aid, but they picked up aid to Ukraine for the same amount, for $15 billion. What do you think about that, everybody? Call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Should we have traded COVID aid, which Americans need, for aid to Ukraine? You tell me what you think. And as feared, 2020 census, guess what? You can't be surprised by this. Significantly undercounted were people of color. Latino Americans were significantly undercounted in the 2020 census, according to an analysis released Thursday And some people are saying that this was intentional. The census miscounted the U.S. population by 18.8 million people. Got to talk about that, everybody, next week on the Santita Jackson Show. And in a temporary change to hate speech policies on Facebook and Instagram, both platforms are, get this, everybody, they're allowing users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers in the context of the Ukraine invasion, according to internal emails seen by Reuters. Meta, the parent company of both platforms, said temporary allowances are being made, quote, for forms of political expression that would normally violate our rules, like violent speech such as death to the Russian invaders, close quote. Ooh, Pastor, Pastor Marshall Hatch, the birthday man. Number one, happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting that Facebook would allow that. I just think, I guess I believe in the good book, Study War No More. I can't even get my radio show boosted because politically there are objections to that. But you call for someone's death, even in the context of war, I have a problem with that. But I need some good news today behind something like that. How are you doing today? Happy birthday, happy birthday.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot of power for private citizens, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
In anybody's hand. Yeah.
It's a lot. And you've got to use the power correctly. You don't, don't call for death, and don't allow them to do that. I don't care what context it's in. Just don't do it.
Yeah, to allow private citizens to be the ones to make that decision of who can call for death and who can't. That's just a little bit out of balance.
Oh, yeah.
Of just and free speech, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's on your mind today?
Well, this is an interesting day. We have been looking at Genesis in the Old Testament this week. Genesis 2:19 and 20 was interesting. Almost you could miss it if you're not careful. It says that literally God who creates the heavens and the earth and everything in it, then therefore turns around and gives the man and of course the woman is and the man are one in the text because she's formed from the man but not yet. But God gives mankind an authority to name the living creatures in Genesis 2. So God creates and then gives man the authority, the privilege to name the animals, the living creatures, and whatsoever they were named, that would be the name of it. It is as if God endorses whatever the man determines is the name of these living creatures. And you'd almost miss it. It's a interesting sort of a teaching there that God gives us the authority to name. I don't think he's just talking about animals, but to name what happens in our lives, to give it a name, to give it a meaning. It's an incredible authority that we have. We don't always use, but the ability to name things in our lives, to give it a name. And so it's interesting the way that it rolls out in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians 4:13. It's as if the pastor teaches that I believe, therefore I speak. In other words, I don't use words to say what I feel. I use words to say what I believe. I believe, therefore I speak. And so I have that authority, again, to name things in our life. It is literally the authority to rewrite my history on any given day. The meaning of what has happened to me in my past is in my authority to give it name and give it meaning. And so Apostle Paul says in the same vein that, that I was hard pressed, but I'm not crushed. I was perplexed, but I'm not in despair. I was persecuted, but I'm not abandoned. I was struck down, but I'm not destroyed. In other words, you can look back at your history and you can testify that I have not been a victim of my history, but I am a victor. I have come through everything that I've come through, and I proclaim that whatever it was that I endured, it was necessary. I speak that what I have come through, I now have dominion over it. Of all of the bad stuff that happened in my past, that listen, I not only endured it, but it shaped me. And it shaped me positively. It made me who I am. I go back and I name it that I was not defeated, but I'm an overcomer from it. And it empowers me in my present because it says that I am everything that I've been through. And everything that I've been through, I have dominion over it. I have conquered it, which is why I've made it to my present. And then I can therefore proclaim, my destiny, my future, that everything that I have been through has shaped who I am, and it has prepared me for really a future that is going to be more glorious than the past and even the present that I am. As Michelle Obama says, I'm becoming. I'm in the midst of being shaped for a story that God is telling with my life, of which I become an overcomer of everything that I experience at the end. So it's a powerful authority that God gives us to name the things in our lives and to ultimately proclaim that we're overcomers of it. And that was that, there was a few years ago, that was Marvin Sapp's song. And I mean, everybody sings it, whether they go to church, don't go to church, whether they're the saints or the sinners, or whether they're believers or the agnostics. Somewhere it struck a chord when he sung that song. I never could have made it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Without the Lord. It says, I'm stronger, I'm wiser, and I'm better. Meaning that everything I went through, it shaped me, made me who I am, and gave me hope that what I am becoming will be something beautiful, a narrative, a story that God is telling. Amen.
Amen. And happy birthday, Pastor Marshall Hatch.
Absolutely. I received that, and happy birthday to my good brother, Jesse. We're birthday twins.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church. Everybody, please get over to that beautiful cathedral. And they're doing so much great work at that church. What is your address? And you're worshiping virtually and in person?
Virtually and in person, 10 a.m. on Sundays, New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church, 4301 West Washington Boulevard, Chicago, Illinois, 60624.
Get on over there, everybody, or catch them online. Sending you much love. Happy birthday, March 11th, man. I knew I liked you for a reason. Blessings to you, Pastor Marshall Hatch. Birthday man, everybody send him some love today. They're sending the Morning Stars are sending you much love today. Much, much love. Pastor Marshall Hatch, happy birthday to my brother Jesse Jr. Happy birthday, Congressman. There you go. So let's get right to it. We've got Doctors Deborah Verholden and Janina Knighton, of course, Dr. Deborah Verholden, Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University School of Medicine, and Dr. Janina Knighton, research scholar, infection preventionist, registered nurse at Case Western Reserve University. There's a lot of criticism. First you, Dr. Verholden, and then you, Dr. Knighton. There's a lot of criticism. You and I were talking about this yesterday, Dr. Knighton, about and confusion about the new rules. Dr. Deb, you said this was coming, but I mean, the polls are out and Americans are really confused and are mistrusting of the messengers because we really don't know what to do. And now we're going into spring and all of the restrictions have been lifted, but the World Health Organization has said, look, COVID is still here. It's still here. So where are we to go? What should we do?
Well, I guess there's no one right answer here, no one, set of facts. I remind people if we had a law tomorrow that said nobody's required to wear seatbelts anymore, it's your choice, I would advise people to still wear your seatbelt, right? Like that's just, we know seatbelts save lives. And so, unfortunately, we have not really had much of a national response in this pandemic. I really believe these test kits that the feds availed to the households, these 4 test kits per household, is probably the largest single unifying national, effort that we've seen happen during this whole pandemic. And so it's really up to states and counties, and even within the states and the counties, there's different rules for different folks. But to be honest, people are big people. They'll be all right. We are one of the nations that has a different age of majority for everything. You have to be one age to run for president, a different age to run a car, a different age to vote, a different age to buy a firearm, a different age to consent to sex. This is not our first rodeo. So what I really want to encourage people is you got to do what makes sense for you. And I feel like people have the basics of what it will take for them to be safe, right? If we're in a surge, I wouldn't care if there's a mask mandate in place or not. I wouldn't have a service person in my house on mask. I probably wouldn't go out to large indoor gatherings if I wasn't masked, and I wouldn't go to large indoor gatherings if the lion's share of the people in the space weren't masked. I think what we're going to have to do now is just really make sure that people have all the tools in their own tool belt, including knowledge on what to do and how to move for themselves to keep themselves and their family safe. Because it's unfortunately not going to come from the places that we would expect. And I know it's very confusing, even within the same counties, right? We've got all these smaller school districts within our counties. Different schools have different rules, but it's about making sure that people have what they need to make the best informed decision for themselves. These laws and these mandates, I would tell people to consider them the floor, not the the way to go.
I came across a story, Dr. Knighton, on NPR, in which they were looking at one Missouri school district where you see the tension and the confusion and the fraught interactions between people. People are fighting because they don't quite know what to do. And we do need nurses in schools, and we certainly don't have enough of them at all. We don't have enough nurses to go around, period. But as a registered nurse, if you were in a school, for example, what would you advise parents, teachers? I mean, because that's like a microcosm of the society. What would you advise people to do? Or just even in the workspace?
Good morning. So I'm actually in a situation now with my own children. So last Monday, they actually dropped a mask mandate at their schools. And my children came home and said, Mom, they got rid of the mandate. It's the pandemic over. And I'm like, no. I said, but what I would advise you is this. I said, one of the things that even I observe as an adult is once these masks have come off and I'm seeing people's behaviors in a whole different light, right? So I can see the sticks line from people's lips. And it's not just being an infection preventionist, but it's like, geez, that's why we need masks, right? You're seeing people cough. You're seeing people sneeze and say still the same things that was pre-pandemic. Oh, that wasn't a real cough or it wasn't a real sneeze. You're seeing people wipe their nose and touch common surfaces and they're not conscious about that. I've seen somebody wipe their nose because snot was falling from the tip and then go to sign a piece of paper and try to hand me that ink pen. So I'm saying that to say I have these conversations with my children and just remind them that there are some individuals consciously that when they are coming out of this pandemic right now, I hate to say it, but haven't learned a lot. Have not learned a lot about infection prevention. Don't understand that COVID is not the only germ that's out here. Don't understand that we are not in the midst of the first pandemic, but COVID will change all of us in a way that has never happened before and has never been reflected before in any of the pandemics that we have had. For example, we didn't go through all of these efforts with H1N1. There was restrictions on hospital visits, but nothing to the capacity of what we're experiencing now. So I tell people, find out what is it that I need to be doing or incorporating into my daily practice, such as environmental cleaning. For example, I tell them even at school, if you're sitting down at a surface, so I have them put like these little packs in their bag, whether that's, little Clorox wipes, whether that's little Purell wipes, whether that's alcohol wipes. Those are in their bags because I said you cannot trust others to be able to wipe down surfaces. But even if someone, let's say, at home does not have access to, let's say, brand name products, it's still put in some paper towels in a Ziploc bag with some alcohol to be able to wipe down the surface as needed. And so these are materials that honestly, even as the schools are letting up guidelines, it's more important for you to have those conversations with your children about what safety looks like. I've had conversations too with businesses that are going back at full capacity in the workplace. Some that had delayed it, where others had moved forward with that. And I explained to them, I said, one of the things that you want to figure out is if you're working in cubicles, what does the air system look like? What does the air system look like? Meaning, is it being cleaned? Is there air exchange outside? Do you all have the capability to be able to open up windows? When it comes down to restrooms, a lot of restrooms are not located in a space where there are windows. And so does that restroom door stay open opposed to it being closed and people kind of being closed in a box with heat that doesn't have air exchange? And so there are those things that we need to look at. Commonly used surfaces such as elevator buttons, such as escalator rails, such as doorknobs. What are the cleaning measures that are around that? And even if there aren't cleaning measures around it, I would encourage, let's say, employers to put up signs that remind people to clean their hands after touching commonly touched surfaces. I would also make sure that jobs have surveillance set up, meaning that if I'm working for an employer, I want to know, I don't have to know the name of somebody, but I want to know how many people are sick, and I want to know if we're on the verge of having an outbreak. And there's too many surveillance systems out here to be able to detect that. The problem is a lot of companies may not necessarily want to make that investment. They may not want to create it, or they may not even want to figure out how to use it. But it's essential in the current climate because if you have an outbreak and a lot of people are out of work, then guess what? You can't be productive. And so I think we're at a point in time that if people are not making the investment in infection prevention on their own, whether I'm talking about an individual level or talking about a business level, they are going to be the ones that are going to fall short. And right now, in the current situation we're in, where gas prices are climbing, whether, when we're in a situation of where we still are facing healthcare shortages or what's called the Great Resignation, you really want to make sure that you're still paying attention to those practices because it's still causing people to be laid off, to be missing work, to be fired from work, for people to not do their job effectively. And we're seeing things moving slow.
Everybody, even though we're opening up, that's why Dr. Deborah Furholder brought Dr. Shanita Knighton here. You need to know how you can protect yourself and your loved ones. Got to do it. Let's talk about Jesse Smollett on the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. 150 days for a Class 4 felony. Most people get probation for that. And he proclaimed, I am not suicidal. Hey, he better come back in the same condition he went into jail yesterday. I tell you that. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Thank you, ladies. You all want to hear this discussion with CK about Jesse?
I seen the snippet yesterday and was honestly just really disgusted.
You should be disgusted.
Yeah, I really was.
You should be disgusted. Let me tell you, when you look at this judge who decided to let the cameras play yesterday, when he shut them down for the whole trial, we saw from the Kyle Rittenhouse case, we've seen from all of these high-profile cases, that the judges obviously have, it's their courtroom. And we've seen that you can have some fair judges and you can have some judges who are beyond questionable. They're dreadful. I mean, you have the prosecutors who told the McMichaels to go home and wash Ahmaud Arbery's blood off. They're being tried right now. And the corporate media doesn't even discuss that. What? This woman needs to be put under the prison forever. She violated the public trust. And Jussie's in jail?
Attorney Hoffler's on the line.
With all of these questions you have about the judge, that you have about the people who investigated his case, and these brothers who up until literally they had been questioned for 2 days in the 47th hour. That's when, before they were looking at being prosecuted themselves. Then they said, oh no, Jussie did this. Hey, CK, how you doing? I've got Dr. Knighton and Dr. Verholden. You all can talk to her because I'm out of breath.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Well, this is very. I don't even know if just bizarre is the word that I would use in terms of the turn of fate for Jussie. Yes, it's sad, but it's a miscarriage of justice. But I think it speaks to what's going on in Chicago more than anything in terms of Chicago politics and the criminal justice system. I think I read where the mayor, for instance, thought that this was an appropriate sentence, and she was praising the judge for sentencing Smollett in the way that he did. So I think this is.
Well, I love her to death, but I disagree with her on this. And she's someone who I've supported, and I still support her. I just disagree with her on this. But she's a federal prosecutor herself,
right?
So I'm like,
and I think one of the things, there's absolutely positively nothing wrong, because I do it all the time, to disagree with a mayor, a judge or something, even if we support them on other things. I don't know this judge. I think there has been a miscarriage of justice just from looking at it as an outsider, not being in that community, and as a lawyer. But I don't know anything about this judge.
1 minute.
And to do any more, to be in this judge's space. But I do feel that the sentence was unduly harsh, just given what I know of the criminal justice system and the types of crimes. And again, once a jury has spoken, the jury's spoken. So I'm not faulting anyone for a sentence once the jury's spoken. I just think this sentence is unduly harsh, and it's not commensurate, or is not in line with the crimes, because he's been convicted of crimes. So there's nothing, unless that's overturned, there's nothing that we can do about that. There's nothing he can do about that until it's overturned.
Hold on, stand by. We're coming up. And remember, we're out at really 57 and a half. And Shanina and Deborah, if you wanna jump in, let me know. Just send me a text or just say, hey, I'm here.
9-5.
Say stand by.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Okay. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. We're talking about Jussie Smollett now. We've been talking about how you can re-enter your work and school spaces, just the public world, as we are really turning away from COVID, although it is now endemic. It's here. But let's talk about Jussie Smollett. He got 150 days. He must serve 150 days in the Cook County Jail. And interestingly enough, the cameras were turned on in the courtroom. I'm coming to you from WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Shout out to all the teachers and the paraprofessionals and the students in the public school system up there. I want to know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts? It's a class 4 felony, and class 4 felonies, that is not what jail time is, not what you typically get. It's just, that's not the way it works. So I want to know what your thoughts are. What about Judge James Lynn? We don't know a whole lot about him. We should, because he really read Jussie Smollett, the Riot Act. It was a very, very interesting approach that he had to him. And he turned on the cameras. He had turned the cameras off for the whole of the trial. But he decided to turn the cameras on yesterday. Isn't that interesting? And remember, a member of Jussie's team a member of his team, of his legal team, accused this judge of physically lunging at her. We've not heard any more about that. Don't you think that's important to know? Don't you think we need to know who Judge James Lynn is? Don't you think we need to know why he's been given 150 days in jail? And do you not think that we need to understand what he meant when he said, I am not suicidal? Yeah, I think he needed to put that out there. Why do I think he needed to put it out there? Because I want him to return as safely as he was sent in to jail. I want him to come out whole and okay. Okay, he's concerned about COVID. He's concerned about a lot of things. He said, I'm a black, gay, Jewish man. I'm concerned. So, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, immediate past president of the National Bar Association, and of course, chair of Rainbow Push, and of course, practicing lawyer for decades. Brilliant lawyer. Oh boy, there's just a whole lot to unpack here. Talk to us, because he got all of these letters of support from the NAACP, from Sam Jackson and his wife, from Reverend Jesse Jackson. He got letters of support, and he's got 150 days in the Cook County Jail.
And I might add, good morning, Santita, the Cook County Jail is it's perceived as one of the roughest, toughest jails in the country. Mm-hmm. But I think there was a very significant miscarriage of justice. And I'm not really looking at the impact statement. So the impact statement, the letters of support, can be very important, can be persuasive. But this trial, and really the origin of how we got to a trial for Jussie Smollett, really reeks of, in my impression, of a system that's gone wrong. A lot of resources were spent by the city of Chicago. When we had originally lead prosecutor, who dismissed the charges and made a determination, as is her ability and authority to do. And that was completely turned around. A special prosecutor was appointed. Everybody that was at the initial judge that agreed to the dismissal, and that dismissed the charges as well. The prosecutor recommended dismissal, and the judge dismissed the charge, who was African-American. The prosecutor, of course, was African-American. And all that was changed, and now you've got a white judge. I'm just focusing on the racial dynamics and the optics. And you've got a white special prosecutor who is well-known and who is someone who's formidable in terms of the space that he occupies. That event right there, that these types of resources would be spent on a case where no one was murdered, if we even assume that at that time, what Jussie Smollett did was, in fact, that let's just assume that everything that he was accused of was indeed what he did. And this is before the trial. I don't believe the amount of resources and political capital expended were justified given the alleged crimes. So from the inception, I had questions and I was very skeptical about what was happening relative to Jussie Smollett. Mm. But now we're at the sentencing phase. The sentencing phase is completely within the discretion in Illinois of the judge to do the sentencing. In some states, juries are involved in the sentencing. In this case, the judge has complete control and utter control over the sentencing. For this crime, the conviction of this crime, typically he's a first-time offender. He's been an upstanding citizen. And again, I'm not focused on whether he's guilty or not, but just he's been sentenced. The jury has spoken. He's been convicted because the jury's spoken. But typically in this kind of a case, even if there is some political motivation, you wouldn't see 150 days in prison. Now, I'm taking away the civil fine because, you're just fined money and you pay the money when you've been convicted. I think that this judge was trying to send a message. He took a great deal of time in what I think an excessive amount of time in painstakingly going through why he felt that, in my words, Jussie Smollett was why he felt very strongly that Jussie Smollett was less than a human. Those are my words. Felt that Jussie Smollett was a bad person. Jussie Smollett was a narcissist. Jussie Smollett. And he went on and on and on. He was very, 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 very critical of Jussie Smollett. Again, these are things that you don't usually see in the face. I think judges do talk about how they feel that people who are convicted may have violated the law. I mean, of course, here, no one was killed. No one was murdered. And we are talking, and I hate to even characterize Chicago this way, but one of the murder capitals of the world. So if you think of in one of the murder capitals of the world where tremendous resources should be
to look for murderers
and protecting,
maybe
to look for murderers, to protect the citizens. Who are we protecting? Who is this protecting against Jesse Smollett?
But but I have another question for you, CK, because I felt that Judge James Lynn's, I felt that his statement to Jussie Smollett was very personal, and it sounded vindictive. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. I think we need to step back, maybe not today, but just going forward. Number one, you need to know who these judges are because they're elected. You need to know who they are. But I think we need to know who he is because I just thought it was interesting, CK, that he turned the cameras off for the whole of the trial, but he decided to turn the cameras on for the sentencing so we could see him, so he could underscore his point about all that he felt that Jussie was not.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's by design. This judge has undoubtedly, as I understand, received quite a bit of criticism for his conduct during trial. And he wanted to make a point. And his point, I believe, was this is my courtroom. I'll rule it the way I want to. You have offended my system and my sensibilities, and I'm going to let you have it. Because I guess you didn't understand, Mr. Smollett, that at the end of the day, this is my courtroom and I'm in charge.
And I'm in charge of you.
And I'm in charge of you. And I have to tell you, judges are in charge of sentencing in different states criminals. So a lot of it was a power play, but the reality is it was all in his hands. It's very interesting, not being critical, but just interesting, and I'm sure they have their reasons, that there was no allocution or anything by Jesse. In other words, Jesse didn't make a statement. He didn't speak. And maybe that was on advice of counsel. Maybe he just felt that if he spoke, he might say something to make it worse. So not that him speaking would have made a difference. He probably felt that the letters of support and all that should have made a difference. And they evidently didn't make a difference unless the judge was thinking of sentencing him for a longer period of time, which, is completely feasible with this judge.
Well,
this judge has really, made no bones about it that he felt strongly that Jesse, there were many things wrong with Jesse.
And that he did not like him.
At trial.
And that he did not like him.
No, he made, but he didn't like, but I think it's more. He thinks it's more than he just doesn't like him. Mm-hmm. He believes that there's something fundamentally wrong. That's his opinion. And I think it's a miscarriage of justice. I think it's a travesty. Now, I know that there are a lot of appealable issues, but, appellate issues take a while to go through the system. And Jesse more than likely will have served his time before any of the appellate issues are resolved. So,
well, I want everybody to continue to call us at 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. What do you think about this verdict, about this sentencing? They took him right to Cook County Jail. And as he was about to leave, Jussie Smollett said, quote, "I respect you, Your Honor. I respect your decision. Jail time? I'm not suicidal. If anything happens to me in there, I did not do it myself." And Jussie Smollett, to fully disclose to someone I know he is not suicidal. He's not that. He's not even from that kind of family. They roll deep and they roll together. He is not someone disconnected from anybody, CK. He is from a large, loving family, and he has a large, loving family of friends around him. He has everything to live for, everything. So he needs to be okay, everybody. And I say that with all of my heart, and I think we need to watch. So Pam from the west side of Chicago, how you doing, Pam? What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Santita and Attorney CK and others who are there. I watched, first, Santita, I wanted to talk about COVID. I am concerned about the unmasking. Mm-hmm. I haven't done so. And I'm also concerned that when the virus was just at its peak, you know, it was our wage workers, our blue collar workers out there keeping this country going. And some of our companies just behaved just horribly because they didn't want to have safety protocols in their offices and just didn't want to protect the people who kept the country running. So I'm very concerned about that and kept it safe. So I'm still wearing my mask and I'm still using hand sanitizer. I don't know the long-term effects of hand sanitizer, but I still use it. And I'm also concerned people are coughing in their hands, and we don't know the cold virus. I don't know how that's going to, I guess, appear in people's system since we've been masked. Okay, moving on to Jesse Smollett. Miscarriage of justice. And Attorney C.K., and for you too, Santita, I know you won't be able to go into this, but what also caught me was the fact how this came about. And I think you touched on that, Attorney C.K. There was that a Judge Sheila, I think Bryan or O'Brien, who felt compelled, and this is what the judge said, she was so disturbed and felt compelled to come before him and appeal, I guess, and ask for a special prosecutor because of Jesse Smollett's original sentencing of, I think, community service. So, Attorney C.K., I had no idea that was even possible. And for you, Santita, you know, where we come from, why wasn't this done for all the miscarriages of justice under Dick Devine, under Daley, under Anita Alvarez? Because we know how that state's attorney's office was corrupt. And I had never, ever heard of a citizen, a retired judge, doing something like this in the many, many cases, Santita, where Black people were convicted wrongly. No one had ever done this. And I'm just wondering if you've heard of it, Santita, or you. I'm so glad Jesse Smollett said, if something happens to me, it's not a suicide, it's a homicide. I'm glad he was very clear about that. And the judge going into his rant, well, you know, you're a fighter against racism and hate. And then the judge said at the peak of this, we were just trying to unite and heal this country under racism. That's an out-and-out lie. Excuse me for phrasing it that way. There was never any racial healing. And to say that somehow Jesse Smollett just exacerbated that for the gay, the LGBT community, and for Black people, that was just a bald-faced lie. So let me just end with that. But Santita, let me also say to your mother and to your brother, happy birthday. And Santita, I just remember, and let me just say, I remember your mom's fierce moment, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, at Vieques.
Yes.
Am I pronouncing that right?
Absolutely.
And she gave a look to the people who were handcuffing her as like, you know what, you're not doing anything but making it worse for yourself.
Oh, well,
and she stood strong and long, and I remember that. But I'll hang up. But if you could if you could really address that, the Sheila Bryant, I think, or O'Brien, I'm gonna look it up.
Well, when they first assigned him, I think you're speaking of this, Pam. He got community service. You know, and which, you know, quite frankly, is an extension of things that he'd been doing quietly in the city since he'd been doing Empire. You know, I mean, he's from a family, just so that you know, Pam. They all do this all the time. I mean, his godmother's Angela Davis. It doesn't have to mean anything, but in his case, it does, because they are like that. You know, when you meet his mother and when you meet his family, if you look at the roles that they've chosen, have been the roles that artists choose. They are transformative. So, and the fact that he did not want to see Kay and Pam, he didn't want to go public with this. You know, because when you go public with these kinds of charges, you know, you can't control what else comes out about your life. He said, you know, I had to say things about my personal life or things were said about my personal life in front of my mother. He said, I just said, oh my gosh, things you don't want your mama to know because, it's personal and you're grown. But I'm very disturbed by this, CK, because it just feels like a complete perversion of justice. I want you to call us at 773-763-9278. Thank you, Pam. Thank you. 773-763-9278. What are your thoughts about him being sent to jail immediately? I mean, in a CK, this is a class 4 felony. Talk to me about a class 4 felony. Don't they often get probation?
Well, they do often get probation, but the
But not
thing
always.
is, and not, let me just say this. Let me start again by saying this is, I believe, a grave miscarriage of justice. Okay, that's where I start and that's where I end. Now I want to unpack the system. When you are in the system and your fate is in the hands of a judge for sentencing, you are at that judge's mercy. Period. End of discussion. Whether you like the judge, hate the judge, you are at that judge's mercy. And that is the reality of Jussie Smollett. He was at that judge's mercy. That's not anything new. His lawyers would have told him that. So when you have a judge that you felt conducted himself in such a way as to be abusive during trial on many levels, let me just put it that way. Those are the allegations in some of the post-trial motions and the like. This judge is going to do exactly what he did, in my impression, during trial, which is what gave me concern at the sentencing phase. So when we talk about how people are usually not sentenced in this very aggressive way for crimes like this, it's sort of like how in the Kim Potter case, we would have expected her to have gotten more time. The message there is you're completely and utterly within the power and control of the judge in most jurisdictions when it comes to sentencing. And that's what it is. So this judge whose conduct was exceptionally questionable, in my humble impression, during trial is the same judge who's going to do the sentencing. So this is consistent with his behavior and conduct during the trial. But it doesn't make it right, because I thought there was a miscarriage of justice potentially during trial, not knowing, all of the ins and outs and the strategies of the trial teams. But I do feel definitely that this sentence was not consistent with what it should have been, in my impression. But I got to say that we have to understand the power that judges have when it comes to these types of things in the criminal justice system. Sentencing.
Is there anything that is there anything that can be done? I mean, can the judge be investigated? Will there be an investigation about the accusation of the judge lunging at?
I mean, all of those things, certainly, all those things. I imagine, again, that his legal team is doing all those things. Filed notices of appeal, filed motions and everything for the misconduct that they perceived of the judge. But that takes time. It's not going to stop Justice Smollett from serving that time. The way I look at it is what can be done right now, and basically nothing. That would prevent Justice Smollett from serving. Nothing. Now they can file, which they have filed, I believe, appeals, emergency motions and this and that. But unless there is a court of appeals that will reverse quickly, and I think Justice Smollett wanted to make a point. I'm not suicidal. I respect the court. I mean, I think he was in a difficult position. Your Honor, you're wrong. I did, because he's back on fundamentally saying he did not commit these crimes. And so while I do respect that, there's nothing that this judge ever was going to do about that statement. Why? Because the jury has spoken. The jury has spoken. And, maybe the jury spoke based on what the evidence the jury was given.
Wait a minute. What he would allow in, because there was so much that he would not allow in. I mean, but what is the bigger takeaway? We have about 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes left in the segment.
The bigger takeaway is that we need severe criminal justice reform. When you have someone who shoots and kills and is convicted by a jury in the Midwest, as in the case of Dante Wright, who her sentence is about similar in magnitude as Jussie Smollett's sentence. Jussie Smollett didn't shoot and kill anyone. And so even if we assume, because he's been convicted, okay, let's look at the crime that he committed. The lack of if you compare the crime of shooting and killing someone, as Kim Potter did, to what Jussie Smollett did, for them to receive commensurate sentences even just on that is a gross miscarriage of justice, but it underscores the need for criminal justice reform because of there's so many different scenarios that can play out depending upon where you are. So the takeaway, we need criminal justice reform. The takeaway is let's look at who we are electing as judges. These judges, for the most part, are elected.
I want you to call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763. WCPT, what do you make of this sentencing? What do you make of this sentencing? What do you make of Jussie Smollett saying, I respect you, Your Honor. I respect your decision. Jail time. I am not suicidal. If anything happens to me in there, I did not do it myself. What do you think about that? And what do you think about Ukraine? What do you think about Ukraine? We're going to be talking about that too. A bit of a mashup here, but we got to do that. CK, got a minute.
One thing I want to say. There are some phenomenal judges in this country, phenomenal, that are truly purveyors of justice. I know many of them. I've seen many judges in the courtroom who do a phenomenal job. But then there are other judges that, just like in any profession, that make it worse and give people pause and cause a lack of trust with the criminal justice system. And I think this is an example of that. Again, a judge, I just want everyone to understand the role and the power that judges have. So when we're electing judges, look at their
1 minute.
Look at their sentencing. Look at all of these things when you make a determination of going forward who you support.
But
we have election cycles coming up.
Very quickly, is there anything that you can do in the legal system to check a judge? You can check. You can be held in contempt of court. All kinds of things can happen to lawyers and defendants in the courtroom. What can we do to check a judge? I've got 30 seconds.
Well, judges, there are commissions in different states where you can file complaints against a judge. Remember, the judges have wide discretion. They have immunity in a courtroom, but they can't govern with impunity. So they do have to answer to a higher order, but they have a lot of discretion because everybody literally is going to be a loser in a courtroom with a judge. And I would imagine the allegation of lunging at a defense attorney, that is in the hands. But I don't know what the attorneys are doing. But yes, there is recourse in terms of attempting to put in check what is perceived as
you lunge at a woman in a courtroom. Wait a minute. I know some camera was on. Somebody, something saw, some device saw something. Something happened. Oh, I want to take your calls about that, but we're also going to be talking about Ukraine. Is there a path to peace? I believe that there is. What role will the church play? What role should they play? I'm going to be talking about that and taking your comments and questions about this as well on the Santita Jackson Show. Back in just a minute. Oh, CK, it's a lot. Oof. Every day is something new. Whew. CK,
no, it's really very sad. When I think of what's happening to Jussie Smollett, think of what's happening to Brittany Grenier in Russia, in jail in Russia. We're talking about some questions.
Well, I think with her, we have to be careful. And this is the only reason I say, because I do want her to be released, but they would have to do with that on, really out of compassion. Because we have to be very careful when we travel. We have to be very, very careful. And you cannot expect people to overturn their laws for you. And that's where my father has always said that relationships matter. He has not gotten all these people released all over the world from hostile governments. Because he walked in there arrogantly, and disrespectfully. And Americans, there's something called the ugly American. I'm not accusing her of that. I'm saying that you just have to be very, very, very careful when you travel, and you really have to be very careful when you know that we are living in hostile times, because that's what we are. And I do want Brittany home. I want her home, but I know that the way she's going to get home is if we approach the Russians respectfully. And if she apologizes for breaking their law, because she had cannabis oil, that's something, I don't care what people do in their country, they said don't travel with it. Okay. It's, if she, and I'm sure she's apologetic. And she may or may not have known that she was carrying, a banned substance. I mean, there's just so much that I don't know. And I want her back, but we have to be, ooh. And I'm wondering if Anthony Blinken, if the secretaries, I mean, what are they doing because in this time, at this time, it would be very difficult.
Well, and the other thing too, we don't know the facts. We don't know. At least I don't know the facts. But I do know that we have to be very delicate. And I have had the pleasure of working with your dad on 2 cases where we did release,
Reverend Dr. Browning is on the line.
2 American citizens over the past 5 years, and I can tell you it's a delicate process. A lot of times, diplomatic channels don't result in the release, and so what you have to, meaning the State Department, the U.S. government, all that kind of stuff. Especially when we're looking at, we are at war with Russia. You can call it something else, but that's how I look at it. The United States and other countries are at war with Russia. And so we've got American citizens and citizens of other nations that are incarcerated in Russia. So what we don't want is for her to be a political pawn. But I do believe that her ultimate release will be part of a political solution.
Absolutely.
That's what I believe.
Oh,
Mr.
absolutely.
McKee is on the line.
Thank you. But, that having been said, because it's all political, it's all politics, right? So, but what we're going to do, Reverend Dr. Granger Browning from the Great Ebenezer AME Church in Fort Washington, Maryland, has been on some of these missions with Reverend Jackson, as have you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler. And, the thing is, he's done this work through the church. Like you said, diplomatic channels have been shut down. Governments are not talking to each other. He has always done these missions through
Attorney
the
Fancher
church.
is on the line.
Okay, so who do we have on the line? We have Attorney Fancher.
Everybody except for Mr. Green so far.
Okay. Dwight McKee.
Santita, I'm peeling off.
Okay, okay.
Yes. I mean, I thought it was just the first segment.
Well, no, you know what? I got you. Boo. But that's okay.
No, but if you needed me to stay on, but I thought I just thought you needed me for the first segment.
Well, you know what? If you could for a hot second, I know Pastor, Granger Browning is going to have to leave us at the bottom of the hour, but he's going to explain, because he's been on these rescue missions with Reverend, just how they work. And the fact that he goes through the church, and you've seen that, and you have worked with Reverend on that too. And because Reverend is a minister, these heads of state are more inclined to listen to him. Plus, they believe that he's sincere. They believe that he's from Yeah.
And I say it differently. Yes, it's because Reverend is a minister, but it's because of Reverend's good work.
And Mr. Green is on the line.
That is what, like in the 2 cases I was involved in.
Yeah.
It is the relationships, and because Reverend has stood in solidarity with many of these leaders.
But he's done it through ministry. He's done it through ministry. Because the things that he's done have been impolitic as they could be. When you stand up against a no-talk policy in the Middle East 40 years ago, that's impolitic. Yeah. But it was the right thing to do as a Christian. That's we're on the same page here.
Right. But it's the relationships and the good work, the great work that Reverend has done throughout the world that gained him access.
Oh, yeah.
Where people listen, where they want to help. And literally, it boils down to, Reverend, if you say that this person has not engaged in this, then we're going to believe it. And they will negotiate a solution with Reverend, because he has a built up humanitarian, political, religious capital throughout the world that, quite frankly, others don't.
So I think that's the biggest. That's the.
Oh no, I'm clear on that. But I'm saying, like, when he went to Syria in '80, at the beginning of '84, he went through the church. That's my point, and as someone, all of his work has come through the church, and he's done these humanitarian works through the church. And I think that, ultimately, I think one of my points today is that the church can have a real big role, not only in cooling the tensions over in Ukraine and Russia and that part of the world, they can end this if they would be so inclined. Remember, the church is the counterweight to government. In fact, that's why we separate church and state, because church is so powerful. You look at the Pope. The Pope is a head of state.
15.
That's the piece that we miss.
And I hope that we're able to prevent a nuclear war. I'm so concerned about that.
Stand by. Hold
So
on.
all
We're coming
hands
up.
on deck.
Hold on. We're coming up. Stand by.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. We were Air America, but now we are WCPT proudly. And AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, sending a shout out. All love to the professionals and the paraprofessionals and everyone, including the students who are in the Minnesota public school system as they are working on building a better system. Sending you all much love today. It's Friday, March 11th, 2022. Sending a shout out to my brother, Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., his birthday today. We had Pastor Marshall Hatch, and guess what? His birthday also. Happy birthday to all of these Pisceans. And my mother's birthday is actually March 17th. Oh, can't wait for that. Can't wait for that, everybody. And all Pisces wishing you much love, including you, Paula, who didn't tell us last week it was her birthday. Sending you much love today, everybody. Let's talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Jussie Smollett. You all have a lot of thoughts about the sentencing of Jussie Smollett, but we're going to be talking really about Ukraine. And can we avert war? I mean, can we end this war? Can we have a path to peace? Can we find a way to peace? I believe that we can. Who can do it? Well, we need to hear more of the peace advocates, but we need to hear more from the church. And I want to know what your thoughts are. We'll be getting some thoughts from Attorney C.K. Hoffler, who's been with us, who's been on rescue missions with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Of course, one of the preeminent ministers of our time from one of the largest Black churches in the country, Ebenezer AME in Fort Washington, Maryland. He and his wife helmed this magnificent cathedral, and they just do so many great works. Of course, Reverend Dr. Granger Browning Jr. and his sending love to his wife, Pastor Joanne Browning, today. And of course, we've got Attorney Mark Fancher, Dwight McKee, and we're going to have Bryce Green on with us in a hot second, talking about how we can achieve peace. Is there a path toward peace in Chicago? We're going to have a high of 35 degrees and snow. It's a beautiful day today, and we have had a beautiful dusting of snow overnight. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, 11 degrees above zero. Stay warm up there, everybody. Partly cloudy. Yeah, the Timberwolves will be playing the Magic tonight in the NBA, and we had an active night in the NHL last night. Chicago, however, fell to the Bruins. The Bruins 4, Chicago 3, and the Wild 6. And the Red Wings 5. Congratulations to the Wild. Major cities in Ukraine were attacked by Russian forces today as evacuations continue in several parts of the country. More than 100,000 people have been evacuated in the past 2 days as the threat of Russian bomb strikes remains an ongoing concern for Ukrainians. Indeed, these people keep stepping in it when it comes to Europe not being accustomed to war. Prince William says the conflict in Europe is alien to Europeans, as he expressed his support for Ukraine. People said, now that was just a little tin-eared. Even Jake Tapper from CNN said, dude, read some books on your family. You all have stirred up a lot of stuff down through the years. Today marks 2 years since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic. Since then, official reports through the end of 2021 show that million people worldwide have died directly because of COVID-19. And what about the choice to end the pandemic? Experts are blasting Congress for dropping COVID aid, but picking up Ukraine aid in their place. Of course, we want Ukraine to be okay, but $15 billion was taken away from COVID aid. $15 billion was given to Ukraine aid. What do you think about that, everybody? In this $1.5 trillion omnibus bill, what do you think about that? Do we have to choose? Does anyone have to lose? I want to hear your thoughts. As feared, the 2020 census significantly undercounted minorities by 18.8 million people. Indeed, they said the undercount of Latino people tripled from 1.54% to 4.99%, which is 5%. That's a lot of people, everybody. Black Americans and indigenous people were also undercounted, but at lower rates than other groups. But you know, in the Hispanic community, many of them are black, even though they don't identify as that first. But it's interesting. 18.8%. That is the undercount on people of color in the United States. America is a lot more well, let's say, filled with more people of color who are identifying as such than ever before. Everybody, you know, we want you to save your homes. We want you to be able to purchase a home. We want you to be able to refinance your existing home. We want you to be able to secure a VA loan or get a reverse mortgage. Or guess what? If you're carrying too much credit card debt, there's a way for you to get out of it. If you do not have credit at all, there's a way for you to build it. If you have damaged your credit, I mean, this can happen in these times. There's a way for you to rebuild it, to work it out. Call Team Hochberg, everybody. They are your trusted local lender. Call them for a free consultation, and then they can put you on the road to home ownership or to saving your home, everybody, or to getting out of credit card debt. They can help you. Call them at 855-56-DAVID, 855-56-DAVID, or visit 56david.com, 56david.com. Think about Sharon. Miss Sharon, 72 years of age, retired, living in a $300,000 home. Yes, but she had challenges paying her bills because she was living on her deceased husband's railroad pension and her own Social Security. So she called an online lender for help. That did not help her at all. After getting the runaround for 3 months and almost losing her home, she called Team Hochberg and worked with Jose Rodriguez, who helped her to refinance and lower her payments. Over $340 a month, everybody. Over $340 a month. She was able to save that after she worked with Team Hochberg. So please, everybody, call them at 855-56-DAVID, 855-56-DAVID, so that you can save your homes and get out of this credit card debt and get on the road to financial freedom. Everybody, let's talk about Ukraine. Everybody is talking about Ukraine, and we're looking at the generals on television. They're beating the drums of war louder and louder every day. And you wonder, is anyone talking to anybody about peace? Really? You don't see the peace advocates on television, do you? No. You don't really hear them talking on the radio. No, not even on the progressive side, because people are saying that if you are looking for peace, that you must like Putin. No, that's not true. That's not true. But I can tell you this as someone who comes out of the church, I do believe, and it's not just coming out of the church, I have the church in me, at least that's what I try. I believe in peace. And I believe that this is a warring world is not the world that God wants us to have. So how do we get from there, from where we are now to where we're supposed to be? You know, we've got a tremendous panel with us today, led by Reverend Dr. Granger Browning, the pastor of the great Ebenezer AME Church in Fort Washington, Maryland. Brilliant pastor, brilliant theologian who has accompanied Reverend Jesse Jackson on these peace and rescue missions, these peace missions down through the years. Cannot wait for him to walk us through that. We have attorney Mark Fancher, National Conference of Black Lawyers. And attorney C.K. Hoffler staying with us a little while longer because she has been on these peace missions with Reverend Jackson. She and Pastor Browning have seen up close how Reverend is able to do this. People say, how does he do it? Well, they're going to show us how. Of course, Bryce Green from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and Dwight McKee, who really inspired this segment. He said, you know what, Santita, we've got to get back to what the church can do to bring about peace in these times. Before I get to you, well, Dwight McKee, why don't you very quickly set the table in a couple of minutes?
Well, I've been looking at all these advocates of war and violence and the profile that they've taken and how the whole world has been rah-rah in this big confrontation between the people of Russia and the people of the Ukraine. And in many ways is a no-win for the Ukraine because they are really overwhelmed. And I heard President of Ukraine talk the other day with the British Parliament and made a Winston Churchill speech. We're going to fight them on the land. We're going to fight them on the sea. We're going to fight them in the air. We'll never surrender. Well, the difference is when Winston Churchill said it, he had an army, a navy, an air force, and a whole commonwealth behind him. The Ukraine has none of that. And so, they're literally almost fighting with sticks and stones against tanks and airplanes. And so my fear is that it's going to be a disaster, and if NATO does not come to their aid and give them air cover, which it looks like they're not going to do, if the United States is not fighting their behalf, looks like they're not, that they may be slaughtered. And so it's time for somebody to step in as an intercessor and say, we really have to study war no more. And that's the role of the church. I would love to see the U.S. church and the Ukrainian church, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and the Russian Orthodox Church come together, who's a major institution in Russia, by the way, that's hundreds of years old, come together and say, enough is enough. Let's sit down and sue for peace and work this out. Nonviolence has to be an alternative to conflict resolution. And it has to be put on the table by somebody who's operating with the moral authority. Even Jesus said that before you go to war, you need to count your troops, count your sword, count your horses, compare them to the enemy, and if you're overwhelmed, maybe it's better to sue for truth, for peace. Maybe this big bloodbath is unnecessary. Maybe in the spirit of Christ, we can sit down as brothers and at least reconcile some of these differences without it having to be a bloodbath for this point to be proved.
Thank you, Dwight. Pastor Browning, Reverend Dr. Granger Browning, you and Reverend Jackson have been close for a very, very long time, and you've gone on these missions of peace with him to the Middle East. You were telling me, you were sharing with me, you were recounting a memory that you had of Reverend Jackson doing something that you've really not seen diplomats do with Israel and the Palestinians.
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you, Santita, again for being on the program. I don't know if you remember Coach Onandi on Howard University's radio talk program. You have the best radio talk program I've heard since Coach Onandi. So thank you so much for allowing me being on. I really want to share much of what I've seen Reverend Jackson do is an extension of the world's recognition of Dr. King. Sometimes we forget how much the civil rights movement impacted the world. And virtually every country in the world has some oppressed group, black, white, yellow. It's that the color of the people really don't matter, but they see the American civil rights movement as a model for liberation that they have aspired to. And Reverend Jackson has been probably the most prominent person that has walked in that legacy. And that legacy has been able to open doors, as well as the fact that he has traveled the world on his own after the death of Dr. King. And really, if you think about it, most of us do not know who the presidents of hardly any country in the world is. But everyone in the world, especially up until about 10 years ago, knew who Reverend Jesse Jackson is.
And so that gave him tremendous impact and leverage to meet with world leaders. And so when we went to Syria and met with President Assad, again, no American had sat down with President Assad. And Reverend's major point is, number one, he's always been invited by the religious organization of the country, Christian, Muslim, and Jew. And so he's normally been invited by the three major religions who are working together to bring about peace. Secondly, he always meets with the president or the leader of a country with the idea that he is not just going by himself, but he does have at least the unofficial support of the State Department. Every time we went, there was a Republican president, but it still was done within the context of Colin Powell or Condoleezza Rice. So it was not something he just did on his own. He was briefed by the State Department, and when he met with the president, his whole point was that people have to sit down and talk. And as he sat down and talked with President Assad, he had known his father because Goodman had been released from Syria during the time that Assad's father had been president. So he had that relationship. And on the trip was Lou Rawls's widow, who was from Lebanon, and part of the issue in Syria was their relationship with Lebanon. And Reverend talked about it in political terms, but then he allowed Lou Rawls's widow, and I apologize not remembering her name, to speak on a very personal note. And her point was she did not want her children growing up facing the same kinds of negative relationships that she had had with the Syrians. And then President Assad, almost weeping, said he does not want his grandchildren growing up with that same relation. And they both began to speak in very human terms of the toll that the relationship has had on their personal families. And that became the key by which, once that happened, Reverend was then able to bring in a spiritual, humanitarian aspect to the whole conflict. And with that, we were able to go to Lebanon. Lebanon has 3 presidents. We met with 2. And it began to set the stage for at least the possibility of peace and talks that had not happened at all when it was done within political circles. So bringing in not only the church, but the mosque and also the temple, as well as making sure people have a chance to hear from each other in very human ways. Everyone's concerned about their children and grandchildren, and that's one of the ways that Reverend has always been able to interact with world leaders in a very human way. And finally, Reverend begins and ends every meeting, regardless who the president is, with prayer. And he always has a part of his delegation, a Jewish person, a Christian person, as well as a Muslim person, to make sure all the different aspects of religion were included.
Well, I mean, why is that important? I mean, because you've been on these delegations, how have they felt? Because ordinarily, I guess in ordinary circumstances, many people, even on this side of when we're stateside, we don't relate to each other that way, but Reverend relates to everybody.
Yes. When we went, my first trip with Reverend was to Israel, Palestine. We went to Israel, but as people may not know, if you go to Israel, you then cannot go to a Muslim country and vice versa. So Reverend literally was the only person in the world that could go to Israel and then go to a Muslim country. And part of that strategy was to make sure that there was a prominent Muslim leader with him, a prominent Jewish leader with him, and a prominent Christian leader with him. And so we traveled to Israel, met with, at that time, Vice President Perez. He agreed to have the Palestinian legislature to meet, as well as there were several other things that Reverend was representing on behalf of the Palestinians. We then had to go to Turkey, and you could not go to Turkey from Israel unless you had the sanction of the Israel State Department, which we did. We then got to Turkey and then was able to fly back to meet with President Yasser Arafat of the leader of the Palestinians. He then heard the agreement that the Israelis had done, and with that, for the very first time publicly, he denounced violence. And with that, we were then able to go back to Israel, and all of this was by car. I mean, it took hours. And then Israel, hearing this, allowed the Palestinian legislature to meet for the first time, as well as they were beginning to set up negotiations that were substantial. But then Hamas bombed the Hebrew University. And with that, all the work that had been done fell through. But even with that, Reverend was on his way to meet with Hamas. No one had ever met with Hamas. And Reverend's point was that if he has to meet with the devil in order to get peace, he was willing to do it. And so sadly, all of the work that had been done was thwarted because of what happened with the bombing. But Reverend had made a substantial inroad because he was including all the different faiths as a part of the negotiations.
Do you think, having witnessed that, having participated in that, and having counseled with Reverend, because he would have you there because of who you are, could you see, I mean, do you think something like that is needed right now in Ukraine and Russia and in that part of the world?
Well, most definitely. If Reverend had the physical strength to get to Russia, I believe he has the ability to speak to Russian leaders in a way that most American politicians do not. And I think one of your previous commentators talked about Reverend brings so much moral credibility to the
1 minute
that just his presence there, people know he's there for peace. And with that, no one wants war, even though persons have ulterior motives for war. Despite that, the mothers of the Ukrainians and the mothers of the Russians who may be dying, they are all grieving. And so Reverend is able to capture it in a humanitarian way that even can touch the hearts of the political leaders who may be having a drum roll for war, but have never had a moral persuasion for peace. And that becomes very important. And Reverend brings that element to that discussion.
15.
You know, as do...
As well as, if I can just...
Of course.
We cannot dismiss the power of the Holy Spirit as Reverend's moving. He is not just going there as a brilliant negotiator and a peace leader. He's also going under the anointing of God. And as a Christian minister, it's very important, as all of us who are Christians try to, religious persons, not just Christians, religious, working for peace, that God is working on our behalf in ways that is not always seen or even understood. But in the midst of the situation, he shows up. And that is what I've seen each and every time, because in most cases, the world leaders have some moral part of them that can be touched. And when God is in the midst of what it is you're trying to do, he works in ways that you cannot always foresee or even foreknow. So many times you're literally, Reverend is walking by faith and not by sight.
Reverend Dr. Granger Browning, everybody, Ebenezer AME Church, Fort Washington, Maryland. And while Reverend Jackson has been used in that way, Reverend Jackson can use you too. And he can use some other people. We need peace. We need peace. We need peace. And it can happen. We can change the world. Back in just a minute on the Santita Jackson Show. Oh, Reverend Dr. Browning. Wow. You and Dwight set the table beautifully. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of being on the program, Santita. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. And please give my love to Pastor Joanne.
I'll make sure I do that. Thank you so much again. And again, your show is the best. So thank you so much.
Look, I'm up there with Kojo Namdi in your mind. I'm like, what? Are you okay this morning? But I love it.
Kojo Namdi. is saying he's the one that's honored to be in your category. So thank you.
I love Kojo.
Right.
What? We love Kojo. Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you. And I'll call Jesse Jr. to wish him happy birthday. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. It is his birthday. Praise God. Jesse, Johnny, and I were born in a cluster. We were born in a 2.5 year span. Yikes.
Wow. Wow. And your mother's the 17th.
Yes. And then Jesse's daughter is this month too. I mean, we got a lot of Pisceans in our family.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Wow. But thank you again, and God bless you. We'll be looking forward to speaking to you in the near future.
Absolutely. It'll be very, very soon. Thank you.
God bless you again.
God bless you. God bless you. Well, Mark Fancher, do we have Bryce Green and we have Mark Fancher, the elder of the church?
Wells.
Oh, who do we have?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I know after all that, I know Mark is ready to go. Hallelujah. That's his middle name. I ain't mad at you. But I think what I am very clear that I'm in the peace lane and I want to stay right here. I want to stay right here. CK, are you there?
I'm still here.
Okay, because I want you to talk about what you've seen on these peace missions, and it's really to help you all to see that the so-called impossible can happen. With God, there is nothing that's impossible. What did Muhammad Ali say? He said, "Impossible says I'm possible." You just have to make yourself available, and we have to make a decision that we want to have peace. That's a decision. If you look at the news, it's like war porn. They're so excited, oh my gosh, about this war. They don't have anyone from the peace community talking about anything. They just have the generals on, and this is how we're going to bomb this up. And this is how, I'm like, what? What is this? This is not right. It's not right. And it's unsustainable. Chaparral Wells, how you doing?
I'm here, Santita. I'm doing great.
Great. Are you down at South by Southwest?
No, I get there tomorrow.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let us know very quickly about this. You have about 90 seconds.
Yes, Santita. I'll actually be speaking at South by Southwest in regards to us taking the podcast from podcast to TV production.
Fantastic.
So right now we're in talks right now with that, so we're excited.
Okay, we're not on the air yet, but definitely let people know. You can say hello to everybody here. We've got Attorney Fancher, we've got Dwight McKee, we've got
Coming up in 30.
Mr. Green and CK.
Hi, CK.
Hey, how are you?
Congratulations, Chaparral.
Hey, thank you so much. I wanted to get in on that Jussie Smollett. I wanted to do that. Oh, Lord.
I know.
15.
No, and congratulations on all, your podcast, just the amazing work that you're doing, Chaparral, and the amazing food that you're making. My goodness. Lord have mercy.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show, Friday, March 11th, 2022. WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio. The voice of progressive Minnesota up there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, sending you much love today. Much love to the public school system of Minnesota as they are working to make this a system that works for everybody who works in it and learns in it. Sending you all much love today. We've been talking with Dwight McKee and Pastor Granger Browning Jr. about peace and just really showing you how peace can be achieved. Before we get back into that discussion, hearing from Attorney Mark Fancher and Bryce Green and from C.K. Hoffler and from you, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Let's hear from Chaparral Wells. You are on your way to South by Southwest. Before we hear about some of this food, this magnificent festival, you have got some great news for us today.
Yes, Santita, we are so excited to be appearing at a panel at South by Southwest. We're going to be discussing how to change this podcast into TV production. So we at Somebody and the Invisible Institute and Topic Studios are so excited to produce this panel and to actually talk about the processes on how to further a podcast from audio to visual and to screen. And so we're hoping that the Somebody podcast does make it through this transition, and we're working hard to put it forth. But Santita, we are still working in celebrations by us, even though I'm wearing many hats.
Yes.
We are still right now gearing up for the prom season. We are doing your sweet tables as well as also your balloon arches and everything. So please give us a call. 708-526-4546, 708-526-4546, and don't hesitate to give us a call. We'll be happy to supply your needs.
And
Thank
she's
you.
with her babies right now. And that's okay. We love it. We're talking about peace in Ukraine. Is it possible to have peace in Ukraine and Russia? I mean, we see this mad dash to war, Attorney Mark Fancher. But we were listening in the last segment about how the most seemingly intractable, just unresolvable issues, the door can be opened. And the church really has a role to play in that. Peace advocates have a role to play. Your thoughts?
Well, I certainly think so. But, I think that the challenge is one that has to be considered with an understanding that the principles involved in this conflict see this whole situation through possibly a religious prism that is unique to them, and which may not be shared by many of the religious leaders, peace activists, or whoever it may be that would come and speak with them. If, for whatever, it may be the case that Putin regards himself as a messiah, and that he is engaged in a holy mission, by trying to go into Ukraine and to do the things that he's doing, and he thinks that that's consistent with his religious faith, then that presents a real challenge. If, on the other hand, the people of Ukraine, including President Zelensky, believes that he's acting consistent with his Jewish faith to defend against a great evil which is coming into his country, then that presents a challenge itself. So, in a real sense, I think that the religious voices need to be able to provide a reality check, a religious reality check for the people involved, so that they understand that notwithstanding their beliefs from their perspectives, that violence is the appropriate way to deal with this situation consistent with what God wants, that it in fact is not. I also think that this has to include more than just the leaders of the countries. You can appeal to them and hope that they will make decisions. But as is true in all situations, it's not individuals who make history. Masses of people make history. And it really falls to the people of Russia, the people of Ukraine, to make clear that there is another way out of this and that that's what they want. And in order for them to understand it, I think they need to have a discussion that is broader than just the question of whether people should shoot at each other, whether people should bomb each other. They need to also look at the underlying circumstances and the things that have led up to this conflict that may not involve the hot war. They need to look at Russia's imperial aspirations and whether leading up to this, there has been a desire on the part of the leaders of Russia to expand their reach and their control. And they also need to look at NATO's imperial aspirations and the fact that it has tried to, in many ways, provoke Russia by making moves within recent history that have been regarded as a threat to Russia's, territorial integrity and its sovereignty. They need to look at who stands to benefit and profit from war. Defense contractors, politicians and others who look not only to ramp up their profits, with the threat of war and the supposed need for them to manufacture more bombs and more guns, but also from the many contractors who, according to what is called the shock doctrine, look forward to the destruction of Ukraine so that they can go in and, be paid billions of dollars in order to rebuild a country. So there's a lot that I think is on the table for religious consideration. But ultimately, as Reverend Granger said, the power of the Holy Spirit is what's going to make the difference. And I think that if you get entire countries of people not only speaking what God really would want in this situation, but praying and asking for his intervention, the chances of success are much higher.
Bryce Green, is there a pathway to peace? It might be through the church, it might be through peace advocates, but if you look at the news, you don't hear about any of this. You don't hear that there's a pathway to peace. You just hear a lot of, the rhetoric just continues to get hotter by the day.
Right. And if you turn on like cable news, for example, the only voices that you'll hear are people either calling for a no-fly zone, which is insane, or people calling for tighter sanctions, which is also a questionable policy. What we should be trying to do is trying to get voices who will talk about negotiations and peace talks and diplomacy. But that seems to be very far removed from where people's minds are. Like you said, they're beating the drums of war. But the peace talks are going on. And if you look at some of the reporting about what Putin wants from Ukraine in order to achieve peace, they look a lot like what Putin was asking for before he even started the war. Namely, he wants Ukraine not to join NATO. He wants Ukraine to recognize those Eastern republics that broke away after the civil war in 2014. And he wants Ukraine to recognize Crimea as Russian. Now, the United States has come out in opposition to these peace talks for whatever reason. But these peace talks are going on. And what we need to figure out is whether or not these peace terms make sense. And from my standpoint, it looks like they do. Because the Eastern republics, they have been not under Ukrainian control for the last 8 years. And the Ukrainian government has refused to implement the peace accords that would reintegrate them into the country, which tells me that they're fine with them being outside of Ukrainian sovereignty. And Crimea has been was annexed by Russia 8 years ago, and there really is no chance of taking back Crimea, notably because Crimea contains one of the major Russian military bases in the Mediterranean. And as far as NATO goes, the Ukrainian President Zelensky has voiced that he is open to renouncing NATO, to promising never to join NATO. And so that looks like a significant avenue for progress if we really care about stopping this conflict. But you don't see that coming from the U.S. side. All you see on the U.S. side is people talking about, like I said, no-fly zones, ways to escalate the sanctions, ways to destabilize Russia. You saw Jen Psaki talking the other day about how she's so excited that we're destroying the Russian economy. Well, that doesn't make for a peaceful world. If you destabilize a major nuclear power, well, that will cause major problems down the road, something that these people don't seem to be thinking of. And so we need to be looking at alternatives to escalation. We need to be talking about the path to de-escalation. And I think that's where peace advocates should be. Peace advocates should be saying no to any escalation, no to sending military aid, and yes to negotiations.
Well, then what do you make of the COVID switch? That is to say, COVID relief for Americans was pulled out of its $1.5 trillion omnibus package yesterday, but aid to Ukraine, in this military effort was the replacement.
Right. And this, I think, is part of the neoliberal assault on civil society in America. The $15 billion that was taken from COVID aid and put into Ukraine military aid, or partially military aid, that's not a lot of money in terms of the United States budget. What that is the ideological concerns of the people who are writing these laws. And some of these people who are writing them, they don't believe that people need aid. They don't believe that the government should be supporting everyday people. They do believe that the government should be supporting the military-industrial complex. They do believe in the government spending more money on war and foreign misadventures. And so that gets to a very deep rot in the American system where it's like pulling teeth to get anything good from the government for the people. The COVID relief package, the two COVID relief packages that were passed in the last couple of years, they were hailed as some of the most effective poverty reduction policies in American history. And yet we let those child tax credits expire. We don't send out any more stimulus checks. We're not stimulating the real sector of the economy. Instead, we're just pouring money into the financial sector, Wall Street, and buying junk bonds from useless companies. But that speaks to how ideological our nation is oriented towards. We don't care about supporting the people. But as soon as there's a pretext to pour more money into the military-industrial complex, the United States government jumps. They jump out of their skin. They spend money so fast, faster than you can blink.
CK, it is, I think, when you look at cable news in particular, and I thank you for making that point, Bryce Green, all you hear, you don't hear any possibilities for peace. And you have worked with Reverend Jackson down through the years, but you've also been in these nations where there are massive conflicts. You've also lived in Switzerland. You've had a whole body of experiences yourself. Do you think that there is a pathway to peace?
I think there's always a pathway to peace, Santita, always. And I do believe, I don't know this, but it is my prayer that the stakeholders that have the ability to get us to peace in the Ukraine, and I say us because we're all in it. We are all in this war. The United States is knee-deep in it, and other NATO countries are knee-deep in it, and what's at stake is so devastating and severe. So we're all in this war. I don't know if the appropriate stakeholders have been tapped to get us to peace. You started the segment talking about the power of religion, the power of God, the power of bringing different religious groups together to bring about a resolution, which has worked historically. You underscored the efforts of Reverend Jesse Jackson, what he has done. My experience, and I have traveled, spent a lot of time in war-torn countries, including Angola, during the time that it was in a civil war. Most of the work that I did there was during a time of civil war, and other countries that were war-torn. And the one thing that I do know is that war really will never benefit the people. It will benefit interests, corporate interests. It will benefit politicians, but it never benefits the people. It never benefits the children. And in today's environment, we're really talking about escalation to a nuclear war, not just a war where we send troops, not just a war where we send missiles, which we already have, but a nuclear war. So it needs to be stopped. I believe that, again, certain people in the religious community have the ability to de-escalate and bring about peace. Those persons who have the political capital, the religious capital, the moral capital, the humanitarian capital that have, and that people know have a history of bringing about resolution. Those are the stakeholders, Santita, in my impression, that need to be at the table. They may be at the table, but in my impression, so long as you don't have Reverend Jesse Jackson's voice there, they're not at the table. And I say that because, we heard Dr. Granger speak about the various trips that he took, the disputes, the getting Americans out of jail, all of the humanitarian efforts which were sourced. And as you correctly pointed out, Santita, the fact that Reverend is a religious leader. Through his religious leadership, he's been able to galvanize over decades, at least 6 decades, the support and the political capital to be able to speak and to be able to have credibility with different foreign leaders. And I've seen it where actually Reverend did not even have to travel to a foreign country to resolve some disputes. In 2 instances, to get Americans out of jail in 2 different countries where these Americans were incarcerated and probably going to face a very, very difficult fate, where Reverend did not have to travel because he has the capital built up based on years and years, decades of incredible work throughout the world. And so I think some of the stakeholders made the grouping of stakeholders that are at the table maybe needs to be enlarged to include faith leaders. And perhaps that is happening because a lot of times when that happens, it's not going to necessarily be something that is going to be broadcast on CNN or Fox News. You don't really want to broadcast on CNN and Fox News because you want to see if you can reach a negotiated settlement. Because otherwise, we are going to face a nuclear war. I pray that it's not the case. I have children. We all have children. We have relatives. We have throughout the world. We don't want to see young men and women and families. How much more can we tolerate in seeing a maternity hospital being bombed with women who are about to deliver children? I mean, this is an exercise of insanity that needs to be stopped. So I hope that the faith leader stakeholders, that's what I'm going to call them, will be called to the table if they haven't already been, and will be a part of the solution. Because quite frankly, in the past, it is their intervention, along with, of course, other political forces that have made a difference in these types of disputes. And the stakes are much higher now than they've been in the past because of the parties in this case.
Sure.
And because of our position and NATO's position, Santita.
Well, you've got the World Council of Churches. Dwight, you mentioned that you have the Russian Orthodox Church. You have got, these churches carry a lot of weight, but peace advocates need to be at the table. I mean, I'm not just saying that the church should be there because we don't see them on the news. I want to do a round robin with everyone because we only have about 5 minutes left on the air. But let me start with you, Bryce, in about a minute and a half. The pathway to peace. What is it? I mean, because all we see are the generals on the air. I mean, and I appreciate the military, but that should not be, there should not be the only voices that are heard.
All right, the pathway to peace is first and foremost de-escalation. We can't be talking about the crazy things like sending in more weapons and putting up a no-fly zone because that would involve shooting down Russian planes should they violate that no-fly zone. And it should be obvious, but Putin has reiterated that would be an act of war. And unless you guys want, nuclear radiation in your backyard, I think that we should be advocating for the opposite. And we need to get more voices. We need to boost more voices talking about how the United States has not been engaging in negotiations, how the United States has been opposed to negotiations. That's the main policy that we need to reverse.
Attorney Mark Fancher.
Well, I think the first priority is to change the collective moral standard of the world. Right now, the moral standard is that war is okay because of a presumed great evil that is happening. But we need to point out that bombing hospitals is not okay. That's inconsistent with God's will and God's law. But at the same time, promoting war so that corporations can profit from it is also evil. So there's evil on both sides that's inconsistent. The moral standard is all wrong. We need to talk less about resolving this with guns and talk more about doing what God said is what Jesus said is the second great commandment, which is love ye one another. The things that are going on are inconsistent with that commandment.
It's not a suggestion, everybody. It is a commandment. CK, literally in about a minute, your thoughts before I close out with Dwight McKee?
I think we need to engage the faith community in a more significant way. There can't be de-escalation. The political forces, this is just the nature of war. The political forces the positions are entrenched. we're headed for a nuclear war. So the only, I think, factor that I'm not seeing is the engagement in a significant way of the faith community. And I think that, the United States is taking the position it's taking. There's a war with every presidency, and this presidency is not going to be any different. But I do think that the consequences of war in this climate are very, very different, and that is what perplexes me a great deal.
Dwight McKee, the final minute and a half belongs to you.
They're going to give these poor people, just enough money to get massacred. They really cannot win this war. In reality, what's happening is that America is using these people as a proxy to make a statement and destabilize Russia for political benefit. But it's going to be at the expense of these people's lives. This is not the Super Bowl. And a quarterback is not going to show up in the final quarter to save these people. These are real tanks. These are real bombs. These are real children getting killed. And so somebody has to have the moral authority to say it is not worth the lives of our next generation. This thing is going to, if it is not aborted, get out of hand. It was Wilberforce and the Christian church that negotiated Britain out of slavery. The Pope used to negotiate the treaties, the Berlin treaties, and the Congress of Berlin, and sit all of the countries down in Europe and help stabilize them and negotiate those relationships. Unless you have the moral authority of folk who are saying study war no more to put the moral and political pressure on these politicians and these generals, they're always going to do what they do and what they know best. That is fight, fight, fight.
Mm-hmm.
But it is Christ who said at some point you have to study war no more. It is really where your priorities lie.
1 minute.
What are you studying? What are you emphasizing? Where your values lie?
Mm-hmm.
And so one writer said, all we're saying is, well, why don't we let's give peace a chance.
Thank you, John Lennon.
Let's put it on the table as an option. And right now, it's not even on the table as an option. It is sanctions and weapons.
And no-fly zone.
30.
Stay right here, everybody, on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. We're going to talk for a couple more minutes. But, in a temporary change to hate speech policies on Facebook and Instagram, both of the platforms are going to allow users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers. You've got to study war no more. That's irresponsible. Irresponsible. I can't even get my show promoted on Facebook because politically it's a problem. You got to stop. I mean, it's not personal to me. I'm going to keep on going. Study war no more. My father says people do best what they study most. We're studying war. Let's study peace. Let's study love. Love is a commandment, Mark. It's not a suggestion. Let's get this right, everybody. We'll live together as brothers and sisters, or we will die apart as fools in a nuclear holocaust. Doesn't have to happen, everybody. I love you. Can't wait to be with you on Sunday on Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and God willing, back here on Monday. Change the world. Love is as love does. Tell somebody you love that you love them today. I love you, everybody. God bless. Thank you. You all, we're on YouTube on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel and on Santita Jackson and Friends. You all is there anything that was left unsaid? Anything else that anyone wants to say? Dwight, CK, Mark, Bryce. Bryce likes to light up my audience.
I would just point out that this whole peace thing is extremely important. Everything everyone's been saying is right. There is no major constituency for peace in America. In fact, one of the weird things that's happened in this war is that you've seen thousands of people take to the street calling for a no-fly zone.
Is that crazy?
You have, instead of anti-war marches, you have pro-war marches. And that's That's probably one of the most depressing things I've ever seen. Like, you had artists in the Guggenheim Museum. They got together and they were like throwing paper airplanes as a political demonstration, saying "Close the skies, close the skies." What they're actually saying is, "Shoot down Russian planes, shoot down Russian planes, send us all into a nuclear apocalypse." And that just goes to show you how powerful the sort of, I don't know, the symbols and the narratives that are being pushed are, that it's pushing people to advocate for policies that would get us all killed. And it used to be, like last week or so, it used to be like people don't know what a no-fly zone is. And then people would say like, oh, no, I don't want to be shooting at Russian planes. They just think a no-fly zone is some like magic force field or something. I don't know. But now this week, you have people on cable news saying, yes, I know what a no-fly zone is. Yes, we should risk war. If we're not saying that we're going to risk war, we look weak. And that's how Putin wins. It's insanity. It's lunacy. It's indescribable. And that's the sort of mentality that we really need to come back. Like, pro-war marches, get out of town.
That's where we are.
You know, I think,
Mark?
Yeah, I think that, people have not lost their conscience. But I think that it's true now, as it has been historically, that because of conscience, those who want to do great evil in the world have to persuade people that doing great evil is actually doing great good. And so I think with, the assistance of mainstream media and other forces, it has been possible to persuade the world that doing great evil is doing great good. They've been selectively shown images of, families in distress and, bombed buildings and bombed hospitals and all of these things. And so, the person who is inclined to do good thinks that we must stop this, whatever means. But so much information has been left out, and they don't recognize the great evil that is responsible, for leading up to this horrible, campaign of violence that Russia is engaged in. If they knew that there are, capitalist corporate leaders who have been looking for this opportunity for a long time so that they can make lots of money, if they recognize the imperial goals of NATO and the fact that the foundation had been laid for this, some years ago, and that they capitalized on it, to set themselves up for geopolitical advantage and possibly ultimately the destruction of Russia in its current form and its overthrow so that it too can become part of their empire. If they knew all of the evil, all the details of what led up to this, then it could change their perspective. And so there's been an extreme information deficit, so that people have not been able to make correct moral decisions about what's happening here because they really don't have all of the facts and information that they need to do the calculation properly.
Dwight, you have anything to add? Yes?
Yeah, I do. And our demise rests in our ignorance. It's that because we don't really understand what's going on there, that we don't understand this is also an ethnic conflict, that Ukraine really has been part of Russia, that many of the Ukrainians speak Russian, and that this is not an abstract notion from Russia. This is part of their Commonwealth. This has been part of a real part of their empire. And the fear they have about NATO moving next to them with bombs. And the same, we have a Monroe Doctrine that tries to protect us from European interests. They want interests to protect them from American intrusion. The tragedy of all this is two things. One is most people don't even understand what the issue with Russia is, why we're so anti-communist and why we're so anti-Russian. We're just operating based on something somebody told us. And secondly, many of us have never been exposed to real war, and we treat this like it's a Super Bowl game. We don't understand that these going to be real babies dying. And when these bombs hit, they're going to be blowing up real buildings. One of the sad parts is when Biden kept telling the people Biden has been exposed to war, telling Ukrainians to get out, they was treating this like it was a holiday. And now the bombs are falling, they can't get out fast enough because they didn't take this seriously. These tanks are surrounding your capital, 40 miles worth of tanks with real bombs. And a real Air Force is going to begin to drop bombs on you. And it's going to kill a generation of kids. For some reason, that is not registered, maybe because most of the world has never been exposed to that level of violence. It's always been a TV show or a movie for us. It has not been real. But for those Ukrainians that are being used as proxies for these superpowers, it's going to be reality. It's going to be their children and their aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers that have to pay the ultimate price for this. The church has to assume the position that we cannot think as the world thinks. We have to think as we've been charged to think, as we've been commanded to think, that life is more precious than property, and love is more valuable than politics, and follow our Lord and Master who commands us to study war no more and to turn our swords in the plowshares, in the pruning hooks, and to take a more excellent way, that is, put away your sword and heal the repent and heal the land.
Well, amen to that. Does anyone else have anything else to say? This has got to change, because I have to tell you, when I am watching the generals on television, I said, wait a minute, you all are just going over war strategy. You're not looking at the talks that they're trying to have to try and resolve this conflict. At least that's what I hope and pray they're trying to do. No one's talking about that. They're just talking about the war, and they're really trying to make all of this is just so ungodly to me. I said, wait a minute. You should study war no more. We should be preventing deaths. This is awful. And no one is talking about that at all. I cannot see a peace advocate on TV, particularly on cable TV, at all. They're not there. They're not there. And they're not allowed on, because they're not spouting the corporate line, Mark. And a lot of corporations get very, very rich off of these wars. We just gave the Pentagon $782 billion last week that they didn't ask for. And we pulled $15 billion out of this omnibus economic package, COVID relief, that was going to give relief to Americans. And we put $15 billion into the Ukrainian war effort. Now, mind you, I want Ukraine to be safe. I want them to be respected. But this is guns and butter. This is taking food off of Americans' tables. And I'm wondering if that matters, or if we even know what that is. I mean, if we even understand that. Does anyone kind of understand where I'm coming from here?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. Don't you all see any of this? And I mean, are you not bothered by this? And then they wonder why people are looking, Bryce, corporate media, just people are not, they're not watching, and they shouldn't. Because it's just shameful what they're doing.
Exactly. And it's just so sinister because, there are voices within the Pentagon and elsewhere that strategically calculated the possibility of trying to lure Putin into an unwinnable war, to bog him down for strategic advantage. I mean, how evil is that?
Yeah, there's a Rand Corporation study from 2019. It's called Unbalancing and Overextending Russia. And it laid out that pouring weapons into Ukraine and trying to wrest Ukraine from the Russian sphere of influence has the highest likelihood of drawing Russia into a conflict. and overextending and unbalancing it. And based on the Biden administration, the Trump administration, and the Obama administration's policy, that seems to be exactly what the U.S. has been trying to do. And it speaks to just how big of a constituency for expansion and geopolitical war there is in this country. Like, there should be, and like you said, there are people in the Pentagon who have said that this is not a good idea. There are people at major universities like Harvard and all those places that said that this is not a good idea, but they are completely blocked out from mainstream media. They're completely ignored. It's like they're not on the same team. They're smeared as traitors or Russian stooges spouting Putin talking points. It's really disturbing. It's a new McCarthyite era, a new Cold War, a new Red Scare. We need to stop ourselves before we go too far.
Well, I think we're already sliding down a greasy pole, quite frankly, because if you speak peace, if you do not start off your comments telling people how much you hate Putin, it's a non-starter, and it's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Anytime you have our own officials calling for this man's assassination, I said, "Whoa, hold on, what are you doing?" I mean, you wouldn't want anyone to do that for our own president. Whether you like the president or not, you don't call for someone's killing. Are you crazy? That's insane. It's just, it's not crazy. It's ungodly. And we're not going to be blessed for that. And I am going there. This is sick. And we should be studying peace. We should be moving toward peace, and those of us who really believe in it need to start calling for it. I challenge you to do that. Otherwise, you can act like this is just some theater, some theatrical piece that we're watching on TV. Real people are dying. Real people have been displaced. Real kids are not going to be in school today. Real families have been separated, but not just in Ukraine. And I think that's part of the issue here, too, because this happens all over the world all the time, but we only pay attention to it when we see it in Europe. And it needs to matter as much to us when it happens in Africa, in Asia. Doesn't happen in the poles, but in these various island nations around the world, it should matter every time we see it. And it doesn't. What did Prince William say? That, this is war in Europe is alien to us. Honey, study your family history. That is what Jake Tapper said to you. Y'all have stirred so much of this up, and you need to unstir it. It just needs to stop. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Well, because the other thing about this we keep missing is that this is not just a Putin proposition. Is that if Russia gets drawn in too far, and America responds in China's estimate is inappropriately, is they get drawn in too. Because as Russia is looking at the Ukraine, China is looking at Taiwan and Hong Kong and the countries that the British stole from them. And Korea is looking at those countries that the British stole from them. If Churchill said that the sun never settles on the British Empire, well, now these countries are reclaiming that land. And so if this is not properly negotiated with the Russians, or is properly negotiated with the Russians, but resolved the wrong way, then look for the Chinese negotiation to be even more difficult. Because you're talking about Hong Kong and Taiwan that are major economic powers in the world economy. And you're talking about 200 million soldiers, and you're talking about nuclear weapons and the willingness to use them. At some point, you may light a fire that you can't put out. And so it's better for us to begin to try to practice resolving these issues now than for them to keep escalating and us have no experience in how to resolve them and the whole world gets blown up.
Well, I'd like to get some closing thoughts from all of you. After it's been gnawing at me. I must tell you that we've only been beating the drums of war, and every day the drums get louder and louder and louder and louder. And I said, when is this going to stop? And Bryce, you're right. I mean, progressives are now pulling for war. I'm like, wait a minute. What kind of did I just walk through the matrix? I mean, what happened here?
A major propaganda victory. Like when you see on the TV screen, when you see victims' bodies and you see destroyed homes and rubble everywhere, and then those are interspersed with reporters just asking like U.S. officials what they think about, and all those U.S. officials are saying we need a no-fly zone, we need more guns. Well, then the natural path that a person will take will be like, yes, that's what we need to do to stop all this violence. But again, like the peace talks, they're not even reported. In fact, I did a database search on mentions of negotiations, peace talks, de-escalation, versus mentions of sanctions and no-fly zones and weapons. And both of the latter ones, they receive something like 3 to 4 times more mentions than negotiations or peace talks. And even when they do talk about negotiations and peace talks, they're talking about how the Russians can't be trusted. And so it's this effect of portraying your enemy as an insane person, as a Hitler, hell-bent on like conquering the world. If you portray them like that, well then yeah, you can't negotiate with them, and any negotiation is futile. But that's just a cartoon image that's being given to us by the mainstream media. And we need to do everything we can to push back against that image, to push back against the idea that we can't negotiate. That's the only way out of this, because Ukraine cannot win this war. I don't see any situation where like they win this war. It's only a matter of time, unless of course NATO gets involved, and then we have bigger problems. So the critical thing to do now is to reduce the suffering, to reduce the brutality of this war.
Mark Fancher? Mark, you still there? We might have left. Dwight, what's your closing thought?
I totally agree. Ukraine cannot win this war. All they can do is reduce the suffering and reduce the domination and the massacre of its citizens. And I think they have responsibility. Even the president, who has this hardline macho John Wayne image he's trying to develop, is he has to consider his people first. And if it requires him to resign and negotiate something with the Russians that will save his people, then I think he has a more responsibility to do that, rather than the fact that he wants to stay in power. I don't think it's in his people's best interest for him to have such a hardline position. Again, you're talking about a people with no army, with no navy, with no air force, who have assumed themselves to operate as if they are a major power, and they're not. Sometimes you have to count your losses and say, let's resolve this and live the fight at another time. The Ukraine cannot win this. They can only endure and suffer through it. So my hope is that the churches, the moral voice of each country, the Orthodox Church of Russia, the Church in the United States, the Orthodox Church of the Ukraine, all who has archbishops, can sit down as a community and pull their different politicians to say, we really need to resolve this. for the good of the children and the good of the country.
I agree.
I think it's doable, and it gives the Holy Spirit a place to operate. It gives the Lord a place to go. Right now, he has no place to go in the conversation because nobody is discussing him. So there's no place for him. There's no room for the Holy Spirit because he's not been invoked to be part of the discussion.
Well, now you do have to invoke him. You do. And but and that's why bringing up these examples. I mean, I'm glad I was talking with Pastor Browning about something else yesterday, and he brought up these examples of these tremendous experiences that he's had. He said, to see your father toggling between Shimon Peres Shimon Peres, excuse me, and Arafat, when they were not even talking to each other, to have them on one mobile phone and the other guy on the other phone, and how they were okay, we're willing to meet, Reverend. I mean, it can happen, and I'm not saying that it just has to be Reverend. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at all. I'm talking about the construct of the church. Our founding fathers recognized the power of the church. That is why they said there will be a separation between the church and the state, because the church is actually more powerful than the state. It is. It is. It can check it every time. And we need to use God's power to end this. You need to have people of peace. I mean, I want to have people of peace, people who want, a sane world. I want them to be at the table. It shouldn't just be military folk at the table. Yes, they have a place, but everybody has a place. And people who want peace ought to be as present and ought to be as important as anyone else. And we're the ones who can make that happen. Because I know you don't want your child to go. I know you don't want to go. What, the men 18 to 60 had to stay in the country? That's a whole lot of people. That's 2 or 3 generations there. That's a lot of people. And don't think that war, Bryce and Dwight, that it'll just stay there. Don't think we won't feel it over here. And I'm not just talking about gas prices. We will feel it. It's just that's the way it works. You cannot have that kind of pain in that part of the world and not feel it in other places. It's going to happen. So we have to make some decisions about what it is that we really, what we need and where we're supposed to go. So I'm sending you all much love today. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with me today. Paul, thank you for a great show. Morning Stars, I love you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's remember John Lennon, great prophet that he was. All we are saying is give peace a chance. That's all. Give it a chance.
Thank you, Santita.
Oh, no, thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do and have done. You've taken some positions that have not been very popular. But I think, Bryce, they have been correct. They've been right. And you just continue to hold on and continue to climb ever higher. And ask God to give you a clean, pure heart so you do the right things for the right reasons. That's all. Dwight, thank you for your counsel down through the years. Thank you. Let us all ask for clean hearts. That's what, Stanley, you know this. Give me a clean heart so that I can serve thee. You can't do anything good without a clean heart. Ask. If you do not believe in God, just try to be a good person, as my mother says. Really. Try to get a clean heart. Get a clean heart so you'll do the right things for the right reasons. That's what you need. That is what we need. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. That's the only thing that there's just too little of. God bless you, everybody. See you on Sunday, and then, God willing, on Monday. I love you. God bless. Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Dwight. Thank you, Paul. God bless.